Soaring temperatures have scorched areas across the northern hemisphere, and temperatures breached 40 degrees Celsius for the first time ever in some places. Hundreds, even thousands of people have died in Spain and Portugal mid-July alone. In China, almost 70 Chinese cities have issued heat warnings. What's causing these heat waves, and how is climate change fueling extreme weather, and what must be done? I'm pleased to be joined from Beijing by Xiang, Associate Professor of the Institute of Energy at Peking University, and from Colorado in the United States by Bob Henson, a meteorologist and journalist at Yale Climate Connections, an initiative of the Yale Center for Environmental Communication. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So in July, temperatures in London, UK, Hamburg, Germany reached over 40 degrees Celsius, and more than 90 million people in the United States are reportedly under various heat alerts for dangerously high temperatures. On July the 25th, China renewed the orange alert for high temperatures. And according to the National Meteorological Center, temperatures in parts of southern and northwestern China may exceed 40 degrees Celsius as well. Professor Li, let me go to you first. What is causing these heat waves that are across the globe, and how severe is the situation?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. And we all notice that in the recent days, not only China, but also the North Hemisphere as a whole are enduring like the high temperature and the global warming effect. I think the reasons behind this are twofold. One is the thermodynamic reason for global warming, and the second one is about the large-scale atmospheric circulation, which is from the atmospheric or the aerodynamic aspect. I think from the two aspects, the global warming clearly from this point play a more important role in causing the North Hemisphere for the temperature rise.
Mr. Henson, according to the World Meteorological Organization, greenhouse gas emissions from human activities have heated the planet by about 1.2 Celsius since pre-industrial times in the 18th century. How much have human activities contributed to this year's searing heat?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think Dr. Lee pointed out very rightly that heat waves like this are both the product of a warming climate, warmed by humans, and also by atmospheric circulation features. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of the extremes we've seen are greater than 1.2 C, right? In other words, someone might say, well, it's only warmed 1.2 C over the last century. Well, the records established, for example, in London are more like 3 to 4 degrees C above prior records. And that's the case in other parts of the world. Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington in the United States broke their all-time records by 3-4 degrees C last year. So as the climate and planet warm a certain amount, you're going to have particular locations and times, including heat waves, where the warming is even greater than that. So that's all the more reason why we need to take heat waves like this really seriously.
According to the Chinese National Climate Center, this summer's heat waves have affected more than half of the country and more than 900 million people. The center said many parts of China have experienced extreme hot weather since June. So, Dr. Li, how severe is the situation for China? How extraordinary this summer has been compared to previous patterns?
I would say compared to previous patterns, this summer shows a extremely long, extremely severe pattern as before. First of all, the global warming or the climate change in China not only have the severe rainfall, but also in some of the regions there's a large scale drought in the region. So basically, I think the influence, first of all, is on the three northern part of China, i.e. North China, Northeast China, and Northwest China. And there's a large rainfall in these regions. But at the same time, downstream of the Yangtze River, there's a large-scale drought and causing a lot of severe damage in these regions. I'm thinking this could be a large long-term effect not only affecting like June and July of this year, but also could last to late August or even September. So overall, I think the damage for this climate change or global warming effect in China is going to be severe.
Animal rescue centres in the UK received a glut of calls. For instance, birds fell out of the sky and nature reserves burned. Experts fear that record-breaking temperatures could cause a further collapse in insect numbers, and with bumblebees and butterflies among those most affected. Mr. Henson, how will the heat waves, or how are the heat waves impacting the ecosystem? What other less visible impact do heat waves cause on the ecological system?
Well, interestingly enough, heat waves obviously are going to affect animals and plants in various and dramatic ways, especially all-time heat like we've seen in several places this summer. I think also we have to think about, when we think about global warming, the times of year when we don't think of heat. If we have winters where we don't have freezes in places that normally expect freezes, then you can have all kinds of pests and non-native plants that might take root that otherwise might not have been able to establish themselves. So in some ways, I think even more about particularly warm winters as being something that's going to affect ecosystems in ways that we might not prefer.
According to a report by World Meteorological Organization in May, there is a 50-50 chance of average global temperature reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in the next 5 years. And scientists have found that nearly 1 billion people worldwide could swelter in more frequent life-threatening heat waves at 1.5 degree of warming. Dr. Lee, have human beings or scientists been too optimistic about the level of global warming that we could see?
I think we are not optimistic, and in general, climate change or global warming is happening.
No, what I meant was that have we been too optimistic, meaning we didn't think things would be so bad a couple of years ago when we set our climate change action goals, for instance?
Yeah, I got this. So I'm thinking that we are a little bit optimistic, and the reality is actually, the temperature rise or global warming is happening faster than we are expecting
Okay, let me go to Mr. Henson for the same question. Yeah, unfortunately, there was a bit of a technical glitch. Mr. Henson, what is your take? Do you think this situation was beyond our expectations a couple of years ago?
Well, I've always been a little concerned about the 1.5 degree C goal by 2030 because I think it was always a little bit of a stretch goal, and we approached it in some ways as a do or die goal. And I worry that that sets people up to be extremely pessimistic and even doomist if we don't hit it. I think it's very possible we will warm more than 1.5 C by 2030. However, I don't think that all is lost. Every degree of warming matters, and every bit of warming that we can forestall matters. So, the less warming, the better. And we have already managed to at least push off the most dramatic projections of warming from, say, 20 years ago. Global emissions were rising dramatically. The last 10 years, they've been rising much more in a controlled fashion. Mm-hmm. And I can easily see the next decade being relatively flat, hopefully some drop, and at least heading in the right direction. I guess I'm a worried optimist is how I would put myself on that.
U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently said it is time for humanity to chart a new path of living in harmony with nature, urging the international community to match commitments with actions. What kind of actions do you think are most urgently needed or are amiss right now? And how big is the gap between our actions and our commitments? Is there a way to quantify that?
Is Dr. Lee back, or is this... would you like me to address that one?
Yes, Mr. Henson, please.
Oh, okay, sure. Oh, sure, absolutely. There is a gap, a huge gap, both in emissions and commitment, and also, in addressing the peoples of the world who don't have the resources to adapt and to mitigate their own emissions, and to develop in ways that don't add to the emissions burden. Every country has a right to a healthy economy, and we've got to find ways to transfer the technology to countries all over the world so that they can kind of leapfrog some of the more emissions dangerous technologies. I think about telephones, how 30 or 40 years ago, the minority of the population of the globe had phones and they were mostly landlines. But we didn't wait for everybody in the world to get landlines. We leapfrogged over that, and people have cell phones now almost universally. So I think solar panels, all kinds of alternative energy and renewable energy could be deployed a lot faster. I hope looking ahead, we can find ways to facilitate that kind of technology and resource transfer to make that possible.
I understand that Dr. Li is back. Now, the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP27, is scheduled to convene in Egypt this November. Could these heat waves that we're seeing now prompt a greater sense of urgency and more ambitious national contributions?
Yes, for sure. I'm thinking that in the COP27, there's going to be a more severe and more serious discussion on the climate change. And seems like every country is aware of the fact of global warming and the damage caused by global warming. But I'm thinking the biggest point is not like we're drawing a consensus on tackling climate change, but also we need to take solid actions on climate change. Like COP26 in Glasgow, China and the United States jointly declared the Glasgow Declaration on climate change, on coal phase out, and on the methane leakage. I'm thinking in the future, not only like declaration, but also solid actions in the future is going to be critical for the future global climate warming mitigation.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a not so nice or not so eco-friendly or climate-friendly combination of developments, right? On the one hand, you have extreme heat waves. On the other hand, you have the tension, the geopolitical tension, and the pivoting back to more traditional forms of energy. Mr. Henson, how do you look at the way forward? Are we going to see more extreme weather, greater heat waves in the near future, or things will cool down a little bit?
I'm afraid actually on a global scale, we're seeing that cool down. Believe it or not, we're in the third year of a La Nina. And during La Nina, there's more heat going into the oceans, less heat into the atmosphere. So this is not going to be a record year for global temperature. It's just hitting the northern hemisphere especially hard with summer heat right now. I'm concerned that once we have our next La Nina, probably in 2023, maybe 2024, that's when we will see global temperature spike over 1.5 C most likely. So I don't see much prospect or hope for tempering these heat waves in the next few years. I think we have to adapt more readily. Very heartened to see that in China, the 5-year plan is calling for more green space in cities. That is an absolutely fantastic step. We've got to get cities adapted to heat waves because while we look at cutting emissions, we also have to think about adapting. Yeah. You know, it's not a sign of failure to deal with that. We have to adapt.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're running out of time. Many thanks to Xiang, Associate Professor of Institute of Energy at Peking University, and Bob Henson, meteorologist and journalist at Yale Climate Connections.